All right. Hi once again to all you lovely, clever folks who have the strength and fortitude and moral commitment to cover current events in these incredibly dark and sinister times. I am a fan, or I wouldn't be tagging you. Consider this an open letter. But I have one quibble with the way you all have been covering all the nonsense, the gerrymandering and the attempts by the GOP to just completely rig all elections, starting with the House of Representatives. And you've all been doing a fine job, but there's just one important piece of context or information that I haven't heard any of you, and if one of you has said it and I missed it, I apologize. But there's one vitally important thing to explain to people that I haven't heard anyone mention, which is that there's a way out of this nationally that doesn't even require, the need to call a constitutional convention or anything of that nature, which there's two ways to do in the Constitution. I encourage folks to be familiar with them. But the thing about this is, it says right there in Article 1 of our Constitution, which establishes our legislative branch, and this is what we're taught in school, right? That the whole idea is that the upper chamber, the Senate, will have the same two senators from every state, whereas the House of Representatives will be the people's branch. And as such, it's meant to grow proportionally with the people, with the population. It wasn't meant to be tied to land in the same way. It was meant to be tied to people, so that as the population increases, and what does it say in there? If you read it clear as day, it says that there's supposed to be, ideally, one representative for every 30,000 Americans. And we have left that behind a long time ago. How did that happen? How did it get to the point? The thing is, smart people, intelligent, conscientious people are being drawn into a trap. They're being drawn into a bullshit discussion. And because it's about how do we make a process fair that is fundamentally unfair. And then there's the argument back and forth about don't we have to play by the rules even if the other side doesn't? No, the answer to that is no. But also understanding the rules are garbage and how they got there to begin with. When gerrymandering is not supposed to be a thing. Redistricting is not supposed to be a thing. How would you do that if you just add another representative every time there's 30,000 more people, right? Which is supposed to happen. It used to be, instead of redistricting, we had apportionment. For the first, 150 odd years of this country, the last time we had this process done was after the census of 1910. We had congressional apportionment, where representatives are assigned to any newly incorporated states, newly recognized, whatever the right term is, new representatives, new seats are added to current states on the basis of their population increase. And back then, I should have looked up the numbers before I sat down to do this, but, I want to say our population was maybe 100 million. That's what they say. The GOP says they want to bring it back to again. But anyway, back when that was our population, then it made sense to have a House of Representatives with 300 or 400 people in it. But now, so what happened was after, obviously in 1920, women got the right to vote. Also, more black folks began moving from the South to the northern cities and then trying to exercise their vote, which they hadn't been able to do in the South since Reconstruction ended. So you had women and people of color exercising the franchise. And in that situation, after the census of 1920 was conducted, the essentially Republican and Dixiecrat-led factions that controlled Congress conspired together to say, well, let's just not do it. Kind of like how, under Obama, Mitch McConnell said, hey, let's just how the Senate has to vote on judicial nominees? let's just like not do that ever. Because Obama and the people around him are such weaklings or such complicitous ghouls that they'll just never do anything about it, and we'll just refuse to have the vote and then say he's not allowed to name any judges his whole second term, and we know the Democrats will just sit there and whimper and take it. And then when we get someone in 2017, we can fill 150 odd seats all at once so that later on they can validate all of our illegal fascist crap. Anyway, that began after 1920. They just said, we're just not going to apportion. We're just not going to apportion. And basically, this crisis, as it was getting on closer to 1930, it was like, how is this going to work? We're about to have the 1930 census, and we haven't even apportioned new seats from the 1920 census. And, of course, you know, with women, like a whole half of the population having gained their vote, like that also meant there was a good case to be made that if anything, we should be having a bigger house. But no, what they did in 1929 was pass a statute. And I'm going to say that again, a statute, a law, a piece of legislation in Congress, not a constitutional amendment. Nothing of the sort. And they certainly didn't go to the people and ask what we think about it. No. Because bear in mind, the whole time that the Senate was accruing more power to itself in the 1800s, and the whole time that all these ridiculous non-entities, these tiny groups of illegal settlers out west were being recognized as states and given their 2 senators just to preserve a balance vis-a-vis the issue of slavery in Congress. That's why we say, oh, we gave all this land to the Lakota and Dakota and Sioux people by treaty. Well, whatever. We'll let 50,000 violent, dangerous people, like the Nome family, go out there, slaughter them, steal their land, call it a state, let it self-identify as a state, this illegal colony, and then we'll give them 2 senators to help preserve the anti-slavery balance in the Senate. Well, in 1920, all that came to a head because after having done all that stuff that made the Senate more powerful, with the rationale always being, well, it has to be that way because the population is growing, and soon, New York and Virginia and California, all those states will be so enormous that they'll just be able to have, if we don't have the Senate to restrain them, they'll be able to do whatever they want. Heaven forbid. Just because that's where all the people live. Oh no. And all that predicated on, there has to be a balance between these 2 things. Then what did they do? They destroyed that balance. In 1929, they passed a so-called Apportionment Act of 1929, blatantly unconstitutional, yet it's never been challenged. Blatantly unconstitutional. Just to say, oh yeah, that old thing the Constitution says about 1 rep per 30,000 people and expanding it to grow with the population, we're just not going to do that anymore. We're just not going to do that anymore. What effect does that have? It basically just turns the House of Representatives, which was supposed to be the people's chamber, into nothing but a junior Senate, prone to all the same corruption and auctioneering and nonsense. It turns it into a junior Senate. There's no difference anymore when you get 1 representative representing hundreds of thousands of people, and the districts change all the time anyway, and there's no real connection with the... if you live in a place with good local government, if you live in a big city, you know what it is and what a remarkable difference it makes to actually feel like you live in a democracy because you can walk somewhere to an office, walk into the door, and make an appointment and speak to the person that represents you on the city council. It's even possible in some cities to do that with your congressperson. And someone that's never experienced that has never really experienced democracy because it's supposed to be government on a level and a scale accessible and comprehensible to its citizens. And that was the whole point of the House. So the thing is, if the House is still working as it's constitutionally required to, there is no such thing as redistricting. There is no such thing as gerrymandering. Yes, it's true. The word gerrymander does date back to the 1800s, but that had to do with basically like the ridiculous, there was always some level of ridiculousness with the way new districts were drawn. And yes, some level of redistricting did happen even as new seats were being added, because you had to draw them in somewhere. So that's where that word came from, but it means something totally different now than it did 100 years ago. Because before, it was a marginal form of corruption. It was something where they messed around on the edges. It was not this blatantly anti-democratic authoritarian thing of, we have fixed a few hundred seats that we are going to carve up between all the 300 million people of this country. And that's where we're at. We're at a point now where we basically have one member of the House of Representatives for every million people. The founders said one representative per every 30,000 people, and the people that claim, oh, we should follow the founders and all things, are pushing it to over 1 million. So if we do what we're actually supposed to do, it does not require us to pass any new laws. It does not require us to pass any new amendments. It only requires us to pass the laws we have. Somehow, though, I think the shameless liars who pretend that they are, constitutionalists or originalists or strict constructivists or conservatives or any of that crap would freak out if you said we should actually follow the law and the Constitution. But if we did, what that means is the House of Representatives now would have, 12,000 members? And what really makes me angry is not reactionaries and fascists, but these servile liberals that I've had people react to me sometimes like, well, how could we do that? We'd have to build a new building. Oh my gosh, well, let's just give up. Build a new building. We're only the wealthiest empire in the history of the universe, the known universe. I wonder if we could manage to build a tall building. Frankly, I think people would love it. Build a House chamber big enough for 12,000 people, and then every February we can clear out all the desks and play the Super Bowl there. People will love it. Why not? They already do the voting electronically, so why not? That means, that would take away the glamour. That takes away the shine, because there shouldn't be any. In a democracy, being a people's representative should not be a glamorous job. It should not make you a celebrity. It should not make you rich. You should just be a face in a crowd. That's the whole point of it. And so if we did that, think about how much harder it would be to buy a House seat. Because people would actually know who they are voting for. They would actually know them. And then it makes it much harder to lie about them, to smear them. When you have 12,000 races to keep track of, it makes it much harder for a few thousand demonic billionaires to try to corrupt and buy each of those races, whereas a few hundred they can keep track of easily. So that's all we have to do. Fix that, and there's no more gerrymandering. There's just, for every 30,000 Americans, there's a new seat in the House. End of story. And by the way, if we had done this, you wouldn't have heartbreaks like what happened in Illinois 9 with Cato Buxale. Because you see so clearly, it was such a clear instance there where you had a seat come open. There's an artificial scarcity of representation. As with everything else in our economy, they do it with our political system and our republic. They create an artificial scarcity of seats and representation that does not need to exist. So that when a seat does come open, what happens? You have all these groups. You have Indian and Pakistani Americans who feel they're overdue for representation in, northern Chicago. And so they're very excited about Bushra Mawala. And then you have black Chicagoans who live on the north side, which is, always been a majority white area, that feel like they've never had, representation. That they get behind Mike Simmons, great guy, great local representative, wonderful guy. You have obviously Palestinian folks get behind Cato Buxale. They've been here since the 1800s and have been part of Chicago from the beginning. You have the Vietnamese diaspora that came over here in the 70s and since then that, are going to vote for Han to win, because for the same reasons. You have all these groups of constituents that are desperate for representation, that they feel like they've been deprived of all this time, and finally having a chance to get it. And then they get angry if it does. They get at each other's throats fighting over one seat, when the reality is they should all have a seat. They all had tens of thousands of people that wanted to show up and vote. Like, they should all have seats, because each of them represents a committed constituency of at least 30,000. Like, out of all the dozen candidates that were still in the race going for that House seat by the time it was voting day, like, that's the thing you have to understand. That's why I got angry at some leftist commenters that just casually would tell people to get out of the race without talking to them. It's like, these all represent communities that have been bereft of representation, and they all come from somewhere, and you're going to just alienate and antagonize those people by not even giving them a chance before you anoint, Kat, no matter how much you like her as a candidate. And I did too. But it's like, if you don't talk to because there's this artificial scarcity that's been created that causes people to be at each other's throats, as it is with everything else in our society. So that's what we have to do to fix the House or the Senate. Now, that's a different can of worms, because that's so hardwired in to be nonsense, to be so anti-democratic, that, like, it's that, and you're not allowed to even change it by amendment. So that's where we have to deal with right-sizing the number of states we have. That's how you fix the Senate. But as far as the House, we don't even really have to change anything. All we have to do is follow the Constitution we have. Whether you think that's the system that still functions in the 21st century or not, obviously we know the GOP doesn't. They believe in absolute monarchy and dictatorship and, no rights for anyone at the end of the day. But, all we need to do, whatever you think the ideal, situation is, all we need to do in the here and now, we have a perfectly good people's chamber that we just need to restore to what it was meant to be, where it actually represents the people, the common people, and it's not just a guild of wealthy lawyers and doctors like the Senate is. That's all. That's all we have to do. And then gerrymandering disappears. Redistricting disappears. Then all that matters is how many people are in that state. Boom. There's the number of representatives they have. And then you have people represented by someone they know that they can reach. Actual frickin' democracy. And if they get a taste of it, I think a lot of people might like it. So please, and I'm tagging y'all just because this is something important to say that I haven't heard any of y'all say. And media figures have to say it. Journalists have to say it. Because no candidate for Congress is going to say it. Are you kidding me? I say this to them. They look at me like I have 12 heads because they all want that one seat. Of course. Because that's another part of the reason it's a problem when you only have a few seats to go for. It's like, yeah, then there's all this glory and fame associated with it. And that's, of course, going to reflect on the type of personality that you need to have in order to be able to win and deal with all the crap. So, again, we need to get that back to where there is no glory and shine to it. Whereas 12,000 people, it doesn't come with any celebrity or fame. And you can find folks from all walk of life there, and it doesn't take a mountain of money to get elected because it's running in your local community at a truly, truly local scale. Not this ridiculous, like we're just randomly combining, adjoining areas together to get to what, 300, 400, 500,000 people per district sometimes. Which further weakens the power of the states where all the actual people live and gives more power to the illegal colonies where a handful of people live, to whom giving senators has completely warped and distorted and perverted our whole government. That's what we get for rewarding illegal settlers for their crimes instead of punishing them. But as far as the House, it's very simple. To right-size that just requires following the laws and Constitution that we have. So please, I beg of you, explain that to people. And I'm tagging y'all just because I want y'all to see this. It's not about me needing any attribution or anything like that. It's just something basic, educate your viewers, please, about this nonsense act in 1929, that the House we have now is one that's calibrated to our population size circa 1910. please get people to understand that so that we can change it, and hopefully quickly.